The morning of September 14, 2003, arrived in Benton County, Arkansas, the way most September mornings do in the Ozark foothills, slowly, with a low mist hanging over the creek beds like something that didn't want to leave. The oak trees along Route 72 had just begun their slow turn toward amber. Somewhere down a gravel road named after a family that had lived there for 3 generations, a screen door had been left open. A child's shoe sat on the porch step. A coffee cup, still half full, rested on the kitchen table inside, and the woman who had poured it was gone. Her name was Linda Marie Carver. She was 31 years old. She had brown hair that her daughter liked to braid on Sunday mornings. She worked the early shift at a textile processing facility outside Rogers. She drove a 1997 Dodge pickup the color of dried rust. She had a laugh that her coworkers described as the kind that makes you laugh too, even when you don't know the joke. And on the morning of September 14, 2003, somewhere between pouring that coffee and walking to her truck, Linda Carver disappeared, leaving behind a daughter, a community, and a question that would go unanswered for nearly 2 decades. Where had she gone, and who had taken her there? To understand what happened to Linda Carver, you have to understand the kind of place she lived in. Benton County in the early 2000s was a county in quiet transformation. Walmart's corporate headquarters had turned Bentonville into something larger and louder than the surrounding small towns were entirely comfortable with. But out along the gravel roads that wound between Rogers and Pea Ridge, life still moved at the pace of pasture fences and gospel radio. People knew their neighbors. They watched each other's children. They left their doors unlocked during the day. Linda had grown up in that particular brand of Arkansas rural, the kind where the distance between houses is measured in tree lines and creek crossings rather than street numbers. She had graduated from Pea Ridge High School in 1990, had briefly attended a community college in Fayetteville, and had returned home when her mother became ill in 1994. By the time her mother passed in 1998, Linda had already put down roots of her own. She had married Daniel Carver in 1997, a quiet, broad-shouldered man who worked in equipment maintenance for a regional trucking company based out of Springdale. They had a daughter together, Autumn Carver, born June 3, 1999. Autumn was 4 years old in September of 2003. Those who knew Linda said she was methodical in the best sense of the word. She packed her lunch the night before. She laid out Autumn's clothes on the dresser chair every evening so that mornings were peaceful rather than frantic. She called her sister, Donna Prout, every Sunday at 6 o'clock without fail. She was the most reliable person I knew, Donna would later say, her voice dropping in the way voices do when reliability becomes a form of grief. If Linda said she was going to do something, she did it. That's how I knew, the moment I didn't hear from her, I knew something was wrong. The morning of Sunday, September 14th, began without obvious incident. A neighbor, 67-year-old Harold Ferris, who lived approximately a quarter mile east along the same gravel road, recalled that he had been out on his front porch at approximately 6:15 in the morning, drinking coffee and watching the mist. He heard a vehicle, he believed it was a truck, start up somewhere in the direction of the Carver property. He thought nothing of it. Daniel Carver left early for work regularly. Harold went back inside. What no one realized yet was that Daniel Carver had not been scheduled to work that Sunday. Inside the Carver house, investigators would later catalog the details that told the story of an interrupted morning. The coffee maker had cycled through its full brew. The pot was still warm when deputies arrived. The back burner of the stove had been turned to low, with a pan sitting on it that had been used for eggs. 2 had been cracked into the pan, partially cooked, and then apparently left. Autumn's cereal bowl was on the table, filled but uneaten. The screen door on the back of the house, the one that faced the side yard where the rusted swing set stood, was unlatched, the spring hinge leaving it swaying slightly in the mild September wind. Linda's purse was on the counter. Her wallet was inside it. Her identification, her grocery store loyalty card, the photograph of Autumn she kept folded behind her license, all of it was there. Her Dodge pickup was gone. Clear's throat. It was Donna Pruitt who reported Linda missing. When Sunday evening's phone call did not come at 6 o'clock, Donna waited until 6:30 and then called the house. The phone rang without answer. She called Daniel's cell phone. It went to voicemail. By 8 o'clock that evening, Donna drove the 40 minutes from her home in Fayetteville to the gravel road outside Rogers. She found the house dark. Autumn was inside, alone, sitting on the living room floor watching a VHS tape of a cartoon she had already seen many times. The child was not crying. She was simply waiting. Donna called the Benton County Sheriff's Office at 8:47 that Sunday evening. A deputy arrived at 9:20. When asked where his wife was, Daniel Carver, who had returned to the property approximately 30 minutes before the deputy's arrival, said he didn't know. He said he had gone for a drive. When the deputy asked where, Daniel said he had driven around down toward Bentonville and back. He seemed calm, quiet. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the floor. The deputy noted in his initial report, subject appeared tired, not visibly distressed, did not ask where wife might have gone or express urgency regarding her location. That observation, 6 words, buried in a standard incident report, would sit untouched in a file drawer for 19 years. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side in the side yard dirt, and somewhere in the darkening Arkansas hills, Linda Carver's truck was moving through the night, or parked among trees, or sitting at the bottom of something cold and still, and no one yet knew which. By Monday morning, the Benton County Sheriff's Office had formally opened a missing person case for Linda Marie Carver. Word spread through the community the way word always spreads in places like that, through church bulletins and gas station conversations, through the school where Linda had once been a student, through the textile facility where her coworkers gathered in the break room with their coffee cups and their worry. A search was organized by Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, more than 200 volunteers had gathered in the parking lot of the First Baptist Church of Pea Ridge, divided into grid teams by a coordinator from the Arkansas Search and Rescue Network. Search dogs were brought in from 2 counties away. A helicopter from the Arkansas State Police made several passes over the creek valleys and the dense second-growth timber that bordered the Carver property to the north and east. The terrain was difficult. Benton County's eastern topography is defined by the Boston Mountains' outstretched fingers, ridges and hollers that create pockets of landscape visible only from directly above. Seasonal creeks cut through limestone shelf rock. Caves, some of them unmapped, dotted the hillside above White Oak Creek. Volunteers moved through blackberry thicket and persimmon groves, calling a name that echoed back off the stone bluffs without answer. Linda's Dodge pickup was found on Thursday, September 18th, 4 days after she disappeared. It had been driven approximately 31 miles southeast of the Carver property to a gravel turnout beside a bridge crossing over a tributary of the Illinois River in the far southeastern corner of the county. The truck had been carefully parked. The keys were in the ignition. There was no sign of disturbance inside the cab. The fuel gauge read nearly empty, though the tank had reportedly been more than half full the week before, according to Linda herself, who had mentioned stopping for gas to her coworker the previous Thursday. Clear's throat. State police forensic technicians processed the truck over 2 days. What they found and didn't find was telling. There was no evidence of a physical struggle inside the vehicle. Linda's fingerprints were present throughout the cab, as expected. Daniel Carver's fingerprints were present as well, which was also expected. It was a shared household vehicle, but investigators noted that the driver's seat had been adjusted backward from the position Linda normally set it. Linda stood 5 feet 4 inches. Whoever had last driven that truck had sat several inches further from the steering wheel. When a detective mentioned this to Daniel Carver during a follow-up interview on September 22nd, Daniel said that he had driven the truck recently, perhaps the previous week, and that he was taller than his wife, which accounted for the adjustment. This was a reasonable explanation. It was noted and filed. What was not immediately noted, but would later be reconstructed through fuel receipts and cell tower records, was a more troubling piece of arithmetic. The truck's odometer, compared to the last recorded mileage at a state inspection 7 months prior, suggested the vehicle had traveled significantly more miles than the Carver family's typical patterns could account for. A discrepancy of somewhere between 300 and 400 miles over the preceding 90 days. Miles that no one could adequately explain. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves, in the way that investigators do when they can feel the shape of something without yet being able to name it. Lead Detective Raymond Hodge, a 22-year veteran of the Benton County Sheriff's Office who had worked everything from domestic cases to the occasional federal crossover, later wrote in his personal investigative journal, a journal that would become a critical piece of the case's eventual reopening. The husband doesn't ask the right questions. When I told him the truck was found, he nodded. He didn't ask where. He didn't ask if there was anything inside it. He just nodded. Those who knew Daniel Carver in those weeks described him in contradictory terms. His coworkers at the trucking company said he seemed distracted but present. He came to work. He completed his assignments. He accepted condolences with a lowered head and brief acknowledgments. His neighbors said he was quieter than usual, but Daniel had always been quiet. His own family, a mother in Springdale, a brother in Fort Smith, rallied around him publicly, insisting to anyone who asked that Daniel was devastated, that Daniel was a good man, that the family was suffering. But Donna Pruitt, who was watching with the specific attention of a sister who had known Linda their entire lives, noticed things that she would not articulate openly until years later. She noticed that Autumn, 4 years old, did not cry for her mother in the obvious ways a child might. She noticed that when Donna took Autumn for long drives to pass the time, the child sometimes narrated things, small, disconnected fragments that sounded like memory rather than invention. Once on an October afternoon, Autumn had said, looking out the car window at a stand of pine trees, "Daddy was loud that morning." Donna had looked at her. Autumn had turned back to the window and asked for a song on the radio. Donna told Detective Hodge about this. Hodge logged it. A child psychologist from the University of Arkansas's Fayetteville Clinic was contacted about conducting a soft interview with the child. By the time the appropriate approvals and arrangements were being made, the investigation had begun to slow. There was no body. There was no witness. There was physical evidence that was suggestive but not conclusive. And Daniel Carver had not contradicted himself in any interview so dramatically that an arrest could be justified. By November of 2003, with Thanksgiving approaching and the search volunteers long since returned to their own lives, the Benton County Sheriff's Office had no formal suspects named, no charges filed, and no answers to give to Donna Pruitt when she called the department every Monday morning asking for updates. The case file grew thick with interviews, forensic notes, and Raymond Hodge's careful, measured observations. And then it moved from the active pile to the cold one. Not forgotten exactly, but quiet. The creek kept moving, the trees kept turning, and somewhere the truth was doing what truth sometimes does, waiting. In the spring of 2004, Daniel Carver sold the property on the gravel road outside Rogers and moved with Autumn to Springdale, closer to his mother's house. The sale happened quickly, within 60 days of listing. Neighbors said moving trucks came on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday afternoon the house was empty. The swing set still standing in the side yard, its chains slightly rusted from the winter, as though even Daniel hadn't wanted to touch it. Donna Pruitt contested Daniel's custody of Autumn through the courts between 2004 and 2006. She lost. The judge in the custody proceeding noted that no charges had been filed against Daniel Carver, that he had cooperated with the initial investigation, and that his mother, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Carver, provided a stable secondary caregiver presence. Donna was granted supervised visits on alternating weekends, a schedule that Daniel complied with inconsistently over the following years, citing scheduling conflicts and Autumn's extracurricular activities as reasons visits needed to be rescheduled. For those who have ever doubted someone they love, who have watched a face across a table or a room and wondered what it was concealing, there is a particular kind of silence that Donna Pruitt lived in during those years. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of everything being held back, of a scream that has nowhere to go. She kept a journal. She kept every piece of correspondence from the sheriff's office. She paid, out of her own modest income, for a private investigator to revisit several elements of the case in 2007. The investigator found little that the sheriff's office had not already documented, but he confirmed to Donna that the cell tower records from September 14, 2003, records that had been subpoenaed but never fully analyzed in the original investigation, showed Daniel Carver's cell phone pinging towers that were inconsistent with his stated account of driving around toward Bentonville and back. The towers his phone had contacted that morning traced a route southeast, toward the county line, toward the bridge where Linda's truck had been found. The private investigator submitted this finding to the Benton County Sheriff's Office in October 2007. He received a form letter acknowledging the receipt of new information. The file was reviewed, according to a brief phone call with a department clerk, and the information was added to the existing case documentation. No action was taken. Clears throat. The years that followed were marked by the psychological accumulations that cold cases leave on the living. Donna developed insomnia that she managed with prescription medication for nearly a decade. She changed jobs twice, moved apartments 3 times, had 2 relationships that ended when her partners grew tired of the case becoming a presence in their shared life. She described it in an interview much later as carrying a weight that no one else can see, in a backpack that never comes off. Autumn Carver grew up in Springdale under her father's roof and her grandmother Evelyn's watchful, loving presence. She was, by most accounts, a quiet and serious child who became a quiet and serious adolescent. Teachers remembered her as diligent. Friends remembered her as kind but somewhat unreachable, always slightly behind glass, as one high school classmate would later describe it to a journalist. She played violin in the school orchestra from 6th grade through senior year. She had a particular fondness for drawing charcoal sketches of landscapes, mostly trees, water, open space. In her junior year of high school, in 2017, Autumn Carver was assigned a family history project in a history class. She asked her grandmother Evelyn about her mother. Evelyn said what she always said, that Linda had been a lovely woman, that her disappearance had been very sad, that some things were too painful to talk about at length. Autumn had pressed gently. She asked to see photographs. Evelyn brought out a small collection that had been, Autumn noticed, kept in a shoebox in a closet rather than displayed. That weekend, Autumn had visited Donna Pruitt for the first time in nearly 4 years. The visits had grown increasingly irregular as Autumn had grown older, and Daniel had less legal obligation to arrange them. Donna had kept a box of Linda's things that she'd removed from the property before it was sold. A few photographs, some letters, a small jewelry pouch, a paperback novel with a bookmark still in it at page 147. Autumn had sat with these objects for a long time. She had not cried. She had looked at a photograph of her mother laughing at a birthday party, holding a slice of cake, head thrown back, and she had said very quietly to Donna, "I remember her voice. I don't remember what she looked like, but I remember her voice. And I remember the morning she left." Donna had gone very still. Autumn had looked at the photograph for another moment, and then she had said, "He was loud that morning." The same words, 15 years later, from a 17-year-old who had last said them as a 4-year-old looking out a car window at pine trees. Donna Pruitt picked up the phone that evening and called the Benton County Sheriff's Office for what felt like the 1,000th time. This time, she asked to speak to someone in the cold case unit. In 2016, Benton County had established a formal cold case review division, a small team of 2 investigators, partly funded by a state grant and partly by the department's own allocation, specifically to revisit unsolved cases with fresh eyes and evolving forensic tools. She was told an investigator would call her back. For those who have ever waited for a call that carries the weight of a decade inside it, you understand what the following 6 months felt like for Donna Pruitt. The marriage between Daniel Carver and a woman he had met in Springdale in 2009 had ended in 2015, a quiet, uncontested dissolution. Those who knew him in Springdale said Daniel had grown more withdrawn in his later years. He still worked in equipment maintenance, now for a construction company rather than a trucking firm. He attended the same church every Sunday, sat in the same pew, accepted the same handshakes. He had recently moved into a smaller rental house on the west side of Springdale, closer to his mother, who was now in her 80s and in declining health. Autumn had left for college in 2018, the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville music education program. And in the rental house on the west side of Springdale, in a man who had lived with something for 15 years, there were pressures building that no one on the outside could measure. Pressures that, in the language of investigators, are often described simply as a crack forming. Part 4, The Revelation. Fayetteville and Benton County, Arkansas, 2021-2022. The case file of Linda Marie Carver, case number BC 200344471, in the Benton County Sheriff's Office archive, was formally assigned to cold case investigator Patricia Nguyen in March of 2021. Nguyen had joined the sheriff's office in 2011, worked patrol for 4 years, and transitioned into investigative work following a reorganization of the department's detective division. She was 38 years old when she pulled the Carver file for the first time. She later described the experience in a podcast interview conducted after the case's resolution. There were files that had been sitting in that box for 18 years. Detective Hodges' handwritten notes, the original forensic reports, Donna Pruitt's submitted tip from 2007 with the cell tower analysis. And I remember thinking, someone worked very hard on this. They just didn't get to finish. Nguyen spent the first 3 months reconstructing the original investigation with meticulous care. She re-interviewed several individuals who had spoken to detectives in 2003 and who were still reachable. She resubmitted several items of physical evidence, collected in the original processing of Linda's truck, to the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory with a request for updated forensic review. She contacted the private investigator Donna had hired in 2007, a retired man living in Bentonville who still had his notes and was glad, he said, that someone was finally looking again. Most critically, Patricia Nguyen formally requested the original cell tower records from 2003, the subpoenaed records that had been analyzed only partially in the initial investigation. The records still existed, archived by the telecommunications provider in digital form. A forensic digital analyst at the State Crime Lab spent 2 weeks reconstructing the movement data from Daniel Carver's cell phone on the morning of September 14, 2003. Clears throat. The results were presented to investigator Nguyen in a 40-page technical report delivered on August 3, 2021. The summary, translated from technical language into plain terms: Daniel Carver's cell phone had traveled, on the morning of Linda's disappearance, a route that took him southeast from the Carver property, across the county line, to the bridge over the Illinois River tributary, the same bridge where Linda's truck was found 4 days later. The phone had been stationary in that location for approximately 40 minutes between 8:12 and 8:51 in the morning. It had then returned northwest, back toward Springdale. This was consistent with the vehicle driving the truck to the bridge location, leaving it there, and returning by a secondary means. None of this matched what Daniel Carver had told investigators in September 2003. In October 2021, the Benton County Sheriff's Office formally reopened the Carver case as a homicide investigation. The Arkansas State Police were notified, and a joint investigative team was established. Daniel Carver did not know any of this. He went to work every morning. He visited his mother on Sundays. He sat in his pew at church. Autumn Carver, now 22 years old and in her final year of her undergraduate program, was contacted by investigator Nguyen in November 2021. The conversation was conducted in a quiet conference room at the University of Arkansas campus, with a victim advocate present. Nguyen did not tell Autumn everything that had been found. She asked, carefully and in the measured language of a trained investigator, about Autumn's earliest memories of September 2003. About the morning her mother disappeared. What Autumn said, in a statement that would later be read into the court record, and that defense attorneys would attempt unsuccessfully to characterize as contaminated memory, was this: I remember sitting at the table with my cereal and my mother was at the stove. And then I remember my father being very loud shouting, and then a door slamming. And then it was quiet for a long time. And then the cartoon came on. I don't remember anything after that until my aunt was there. Autumn paused. She looked at the table. Then she said, I've always known it wasn't a stranger. I just didn't have anywhere to put that knowledge. The investigation moved through the winter of 2021 and into the spring of 2022 with the methodical accumulation of corroborating detail that major case investigations require before an arrest. The cell tower data was independently verified by a second analyst, a former coworker of Daniel's from the trucking company, a man who had mentioned something to a colleague in 2004 and then never formally reported it, was located in Missouri and agreed to provide a statement. He said that in the days following Linda's disappearance, Daniel had asked him, in a conversation that the coworker had found strange at the time, whether he knew how long it took for the water level in the Illinois River to rise and fall after rain. Like he was asking about the river, the coworker said. Out of nowhere, I remember thinking it was a funny thing to ask. Clears throat. The arrest of Daniel Wayne Carver occurred on the morning of April 7, 2022. It was a Wednesday. The trees along the road outside his rental house in Springdale were in early bloom. The redbud trees, which are Arkansas's state tree, were flared bright pink in the April light, the way they are every spring in the Ozarks, indifferent to whatever is happening beneath them. Two Arkansas State Police detectives and investigator Patricia Nguyen knocked on Daniel Carver's door at 7:15 in the morning. He answered in a work shirt, apparently ready to leave for his shift. When Patricia Nguyen informed him that he was being placed under arrest in connection with the homicide of Linda Marie Carver, those who were present said that Daniel Carver stood very still for a moment. He did not speak. He looked past the investigators, through the open door, at the redbud tree in the front yard. He put his hands out without being asked. No shouting, no protestations, no questions. Just the quiet of a man who had been waiting for a long time. The community's reaction, when the arrest was announced that afternoon via a press release from the Benton County Sheriff's Office, was immediate and fractured in the way that arrests in close-knit communities almost always are. At the church Daniel had attended, his pastor issued a statement saying that the congregation was praying for all involved and asking the community to withhold judgment until the legal process had been completed. Several of Daniel's longtime coworkers expressed shock and disbelief. He was always just a regular guy, one told a local news crew outside the construction company's yard. You'd never know. You'd never think. Others who had known Linda, her former coworkers from the textile facility, neighbors from the gravel road era, classmates from Pea Ridge High School, said they had never entirely stopped wondering. One of Linda's former coworkers, a woman named Belinda Marsh, stood on her front porch and said to a reporter simply, "We always hoped we were wrong about what we suspected, but we never really believed we were wrong." Donna Pruitt was reached by investigator Nguyen by phone before the public announcement was made. Nguyen called her at 6:45 in the morning on April 7th, before the arrest team had left for Springdale, and told her that an arrest was being made that day. Donna said she sat down on her kitchen floor and didn't get up for a while. Not crying, she said later. Just sitting, the way you sit when something that has been pressing down on you for 19 years is suddenly, slightly, lifted, not removed, not resolved, not repaired. Just lifted enough for you to remember what breathing felt like before it was there. The case proceeded through the Benton County Circuit Court over the following 18 months. Daniel Carver was charged with first-degree homicide in the death of Linda Marie Carver. He entered a not guilty plea. His defense attorneys argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial, that Autumn's testimony was shaped by years of living with her aunt's grief and suspicion, and that the cell tower data was consistent with a drive that had innocent explanations. The prosecution presented 19 years of accumulated detail: the odometer discrepancy, the seat position, the cell tower route, the co-worker's testimony about the river conversation, Autumn's statement, Raymond Hodges' meticulous original notes, and crucially, forensic evidence that had been re-examined by the state crime lab from materials preserved since 2003. Without entering into details that are part of the sealed evidence record in the ongoing proceedings, the forensic re-examination provided biological trace evidence from the original search of the river tributary location that had not been conclusively identified in 2003, but that updated analytical techniques were able to connect to Linda Carver with a statistical certainty that the lab report characterized as exceeding the threshold for forensic identification. Linda's remains, or what remained of them after 19 years in a rural waterway, were formally recovered and identified in the course of the reopened investigation in the summer of 2022. The recovery operation was conducted quietly, without press presence, at a location downstream from the bridge where the truck had been found. Donna Pruitt was present, standing on the bank of the creek in the July heat when investigators marked the site. She said she had brought a small bunch of wildflowers from her garden because it was the kind of thing Linda would have done for someone else. Clears throat. The trial of Daniel Wayne Carver, which began in October 2023, lasted 11 days. The jury deliberated for 2 days and returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree homicide. Sentencing occurred in January 2024. Daniel Carver received a sentence of life in the Arkansas Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole. He said nothing when the sentence was read. He looked at the table in front of him, as he had looked at the table through much of the trial, not defiant, not broken, but somewhere in the unreadable middle space that he had apparently inhabited for 19 years. Autumn Carver, seated behind the prosecution table, did not look at her father when the sentence was announced. She looked instead at a point above the judge's head, at the seal of the state of Arkansas mounted on the wall, and she pressed her lips together, and she breathed. Outside the courthouse, in the pale January light, Patricia Nguyen stood on the steps with Donna Pruitt. Someone from a local television station pointed a camera at them. Donna said, when asked how she felt, "I feel like Linda can finally rest, and I feel like autumn can finally start." Nguyen said nothing on camera, but in the written statement she released later that day through the sheriff's office, she wrote, "This case is a reminder that evidence waits, that the truth is patient, that the work of the men and women in this department, the ones who came before me and the ones who will come after, matters." Detective Raymond Hodge retired in 2011. I hope he knows that his notes never stopped being read. Raymond Hodge, who was 73 years old and living in retirement outside Rogers, not far from the road where the Carver property had once stood, was informed of the verdict by a sheriff's deputy who drove out to his home on the day it came in. He was sitting on his front porch when the deputy arrived. He listened to the news. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew it back then. You always know. You just can't always prove it." He shook the deputy's hand. He went back inside. And the oak trees along Route 72, now 20 years older and thicker than they had been in 2003, moved in the January wind and kept their counsel, as trees do. Cases like this one, and there are far too many cases like this one, remind us that justice is not always swift, and it is not always clean. It arrives sometimes in the 21st year, when a young woman sits in a university conference room and offers a sentence she has been carrying since she was 4 years old. It arrives in the redbud trees of an April morning in Arkansas. It arrives in the steady, unremarked work of investigators who inherit boxes of notes from people they will never meet, and who sit down with those notes and decide that the work is not finished. Linda Marie Carver was 31 years old. She packed her lunch the night before. She called her sister every Sunday at 6 o'clock. She had a laugh that made other people laugh. She left behind a daughter who plays violin and draws landscapes in charcoal, and who will carry the memory of a voice, her mother's voice, for the rest of her life. That matters. It has always mattered. And today, finally, the law agreed. Justice is not the end of grief, but it is the beginning of the kind of silence that finally allows the living to breathe.